Hello, I am Jagan from Grow with Data. Welcome to the Crack SQL Interview in 50 question series. In this video series, we will be practicing 50 SQL questions across various topics. You can use the playlist Crack SQL Interview in 50 questions to follow the videos related to that series. If you go to the YouTube channel, you have all the videos here. And if you want to go with the playlist, you go and see the Crack SQL Interview playlist. If you go here, we already have 7 videos posted. We are in the 8th video for today. And if you want to see the code, you can go to the description section. You have the GitHub link where you can find the code, the create table and the SQL part of it. Hope you'll following up with this series. In this video, we are going to talk about the 8th video of the series, and this is going to be a topic related to the basic joins. So here we want to find the customer visits and the amount spent in a theme park. So let's see the table and we can talk about the question in detail. So we are given 2 tables. One is the visits, the another one is the transactions. So the visits table have visit ID, which is the unique identifier for every transaction, every record, right? So each visit will have a customer connected to it, and one customer can have more than one visit. If you see the customer 54, he got 3 visits, 5, 7 and 8, right? But if you see the visit ID, it's unique for every record. And then we have a transactions table which talks about what kind of what transaction has happened by which visit ID and how much amount has been spent. Like for example, if you see a food court, right? So the customer 9 who got a visit ID of 2, so he spent $310 and 5 is the visit ID. Sorry, 54 is the customer and 5 is the visit ID. And if you see, the 5 got 3 transactions. That means customer 54 got 3 transactions on the visit of 5, right? So it's $810 has been spent on one visit. Now let's create the table. Okay, we are asked to find 3 different questions. The first one is, for each customer ID, retrieve the total amount spent and the average amount spent per visit. Second one is, identify the customers who visited the park without making any transaction and count the number of such visits. Third one is, find the customer who visited the park but never had a transaction. Okay, let's start with the first question. For each customer ID, you retrieve the total amount spent and the average amount spent. Let's comment out. Okay, let's get some space for us. Okay, you got some space. Now let's go with the first question. We want to find for each customer what is the total amount spent and the average amount spent. Let's go with the basic join, the inner join. From visits v inner join transactions t. So how is the visits and the transaction connected? It's based on the visit ID. So for every visit ID we have a transaction, not every visit, but whatever the visits have transaction, you connect with the visit ID. So on t dot visit ID equal to v dot visit ID, right? So every visit we look for the transaction. So what are the things we look for? V dot customer ID and then total amount spent. Total amount spent is the amount in the transactions table. Total amount is sum of amount. Yes, total amount. Just find the transactions, how many transactions, how many visits they did. Okay, count of v dot visit ID as total visits. Since we use aggregation, we go for group by customer ID, which is having in the first position. Okay. Now, if you see here, we got customer 23. He spent $910. So customer 23 is transaction 1. So transaction 1 is here. He got $910. It's good. So if we see customer 9 got transaction visit ID 2, he spent visit ID 2 is here $970, right? And then customer 54, you got 1, 2 and 3 visit IDs, but only the visit ID 5 is having transaction and it got 3 transactions, right? So total visits, it shows 3. But if you see the actual numbers, right? So user 54 got 3 transactions, right? So 3 visits, sorry. Customer 54 got 3 visits, but only 1 visit they spent $810. Other 2 visits, there is no transactions. So when you say the average spent on each transaction, that means we have to say 3 transactions and $810, right? But still we have 3 because we have 3 transactions. It's not total visits. If you want to find the total visits, then we have to say count of distinct visit ID, right? If you do distinct visit ID, that means we got only one visit ID which got a transaction, right? Because we do an inner join. But how will I get all the 3 transactions to find the second part of the question, the average amount spent? The average amount spent is the sum of the amount by total visits. If the customer 54 got 3 visits, that means we have to find the total distinct visits and then divide that number on the amount, right? So we got the distinct visit, but we just get only the visits which got a transaction. We are missing the other 2 visits. To fix that, what you do, you simply go for a left join. Now if you run it, left join join. So if you run it, you have the visitor 54 got 3 transactions. So other customers have 1 transaction. But if you see this customer got no transactions at all, right? So those customers have visited the theme park, but there is no transaction for those customers. So to find the average, what you have to do, the total visits has to be distinct and we have to go for the left join. And how will you find the average? It's going to be sum of amount by the count of the distinct visits. If you don't do a distinct visit, then it's going to be like duplicate the transactions also. If for example, if I don't do the distinct visit and if I do a left join, let's see what happens. Oh, okay. So this one we say average spent. Okay. So for 54, the average, the total visit is going to be 5, but it's supposed to be 3. So why? Because this 3 transactions get duplicated for, sorry, which one is for 54? 5, yeah, 5, yeah. These 3 transactions got duplicated for these 3 visits. So we just say distinct visit ID. Okay. So now if you do a distinct of visit ID, then total visits is going to be 3. Now you see the amount, it's $810 divided by 3, right? So 810 divided by 3 is going to be $270 per visit. Now it makes sense, right? So totally he spent $810 and he did 3 visits. 1 visit he spent, 2 visits he haven't. But when you do the average of it, for every visit is going to be $270. So what is the key point here? We are going to have a left join to make sure you get all the transactions from the primary table, and then you do a distinct visit to make sure it don't duplicate the visits for every transaction, right? So when you combine both of them, you get the total amount spent as well as the average amount spent per visit. So this is the first one. So what is the second question? The second question is identify the customers who visited the park without making any transaction and count the number of such transactions. So this is similar to our previous video. This is the 8th video. So the 7th video we talked about the left join and how to filter out the left join query where the record present only in the primary table but not in the secondary table, right? So we consider the same SQL as before since we use the left join. So what we are going to say, visits table left join with transactions, and we are going to find only those customers visit which don't have a transaction. So we don't have to find the average and all that, right? First we have to get the customer ID and the visit ID from the visit table. When you do a left join and you run it, so v dot visit is here, and then if you bring in t dot visit ID, now if you see for 54, right, we got 54, we got 3 transactions for visit ID 5, but we don't have any transaction for 7 and 8. For other visitors like 23 and 9, we have a transaction. For 30 there is no transaction, for 96 there is no transaction. So we have to get this 30 and then this 3. The 4 transactions are by the customers who visited the park but they haven't done any transaction for it, right? These 4 records. So how to get that? The left join is the perfect one, and then we have to use a where condition where t dot visit ID is null, right? When you do that, we find those transactions which don't have any relationship in the transaction table, right? So what happens if you put and is a checking filter. It's not going to make the exact filter. It just filter out all the records in the transaction where it says visit ID is null, right? So in the transactions table there is no record as visit ID is null. So it will take the visit table and then left join with the null table. So all the records in the visit table will have a null entry for all the columns you referred from the secondary table. So and is not the right way. So when you say where, that means it executes this part of the SQL and then it will filter out only those records which got a visit ID, transaction tables visit ID as null, which is the 4 records we talked about. So these are the customers who had a visit but don't have a transaction. Since we have 54 twice, right? So we don't have to have the visit. They just ask only the customers. So we just say distinct of customer ID, we get all the customers. If you don't want to do a distinct, we can simply say group by customer ID, which is the first column. you get the same result. You can say distinct or you can say group by. So this is our second question. So the key point to look at is where to use the where and where to use the and condition, and then you can use a distinct or you can use a group by. So this is our second question. So the third question is find the customers who visited the park but never had a transaction. Never had a transaction means if you see the customer 54, they had 3 visits, right? Visit ID 5, 7 and 8. For the 5 we have a transaction record. For 7 and 8 we don't have. That means customer 54 have a transaction for few visits and don't have transaction for few visits. But the question here is find the customers who visited the park but never had a transaction, right? Never had a transaction is what? 30. The visitor is 4. There is no transaction for that. And for 96, the visitor is 6 and never had a transaction. So in the previous example, we see customers who have a visit and no transaction for those visits, right? So we get 3 customers. But this way, out of these 3 customers who never had a transaction, that means 54 will be invalid. 96 and 30 are the 2 customers who never had a transaction even though they have a visit. So how to do that? We get the same SQL where we can take this one, the inner join part of it. Let's we deleted it. Okay, so we just say visits inner join transaction. So this table, this SQL will get you all the customers who have a transaction. So we have visits inner join transactions based on the visit ID. So this will give you all the customers who have at least one transaction. We use that as a reference and then we say select customer ID from visits where customer ID not in this part. Now if you run this, we say 30 and 96 are the 2 customers who had a visit but never had a transaction. How we get a never how we get a never had a transaction? We just get all the customers who have a transaction and then we say the customers not in that list, not in the customers who had a transaction. So you get 30 and 96. So this is a subquery, right? So we are talking about joins. How will you convert this to a basic join? We are familiar with the left join now. Let's change this equal to a basic left join. So from visits V and then we use this as left join. We can take this table as customer on C dot customer ID equal to V dot customer ID. When you do that, V dot customer ID and left join, we have distinct of customers who have a transaction and then we have all the customers here and then we do this, and when you have C dot customer ID, right, when you run this, you see these are the 2 customers 30 and 96 who don't have a transaction, right? So this will give you all the customers who have a transaction, and visits table left join with this will have the output like this, which has null value for the subquery or the left join, the secondary table where the customers don't have a transaction, right? So how will you filter this out? Where C dot customer ID is null. When you run this, you get 30 and 96 who never have a transaction, right? So we start with a basic inner join to see customers who had a transaction, and then we convert that to a left join because we want to find the average spent. So we need to find the transactions visits which don't have a transaction, includes those visits which don't have a transaction. So we convert the inner join to a left join. And the second question, we just use the same left join, and we had a where condition where the secondary table don't have those visits, to find the visits which don't have a transaction. And we use the first inner join as a reference, and then we find customers who never had a transaction based on a subquery, and then we convert that subquery into a left join, and then we just say customers who never had a transaction. The subquery is converted to a basic left join. So I am just formatting the code so you can understand that the secondary table is a subquery we used in the previous SQL. Hope you like this video, and thanks for watching.